Why do you remain silent in the face of injustice? Why do you prefer to follow the crowd instead of thinking for yourself? Why do you accept absurd rules without question? The answer is simple, yet devastating. You are a coward. Nature understood this over a century ago. It discovered we are herd animals disguised as humans. Today, this cowardice isn't just a personal flaw. It's eroding our freedom and ceding the world to those who seek control. Prepare to uncover uncomfortable truths about yourself and our society. The primitive origin of your cowardice. Your cowardice is 3 million years old. It's not your fault. It's etched into your DNA from the moment the first human feared tribal expulsion. Imagine the scene. You're in an African tribe of 30, surrounded by hungry lions, hyena packs, and rival tribes coveting your land. Your survival is entirely dependent on remaining within the group. Questioning the leader's hunting grounds risks ostracization. Criticizing tribal rules means banishment, and banishment meant one thing: a slow, solitary end on the savannah. This is why, even today, your heart races when you need to publicly disagree with someone. This is why your palms sweat when confronting authority. This is why your voice trembles when advocating an unpopular idea. Your body still believes it's in prehistoric times, where dissent could mean your demise. Nature grasped this with absolute clarity. It termed it the herd instinct. We are biologically wired to prioritize group safety above all else. The modern sense of helplessness. In 1953, a brilliant psychologist named Robert Miller warned of a terrifying development in modern societies. He observed people developing what he termed a sense of helplessness. They felt too small, too insignificant to genuinely impact the world. Miller watched the post-World War II world, where societies grew vastly more complex, more rule-bound, and further removed from individual control. People began feeling like lost ants within a giant machine they neither understood nor commanded. When you truly feel helpless, what do you instinctively do? You surrender your personal liberty to leaders who promise to solve all your problems for you. You let others make your most crucial decisions. You let others think and choose on your behalf. It's far easier mentally to obey without thought than to shoulder the formidable responsibility of directing your own life. The silent advance of control. Over the past 70 years since the end of World War II, government control has silently but steadily progressed across the Western world. It began slowly, almost imperceptibly, like a disease gradually spreading through the body politic until it infects every vital organ. Mass surveillance was introduced as temporary protection against terrorists. It's only for a few years, politicians said, until the international situation improves. 20 years later, we are more monitored than any citizen of the Soviet Union. Facial recognition cameras on every corner, always-on microphones in our mobile phones, AI algorithms tracking every click, every purchase, every movement, every conversation. Most people accepted all this without complaint. Why? Fear. Fear of terrorists, fear of criminals, fear of anything the authorities told us to dread. Then came escalating censorship, also carefully marketed as necessary protection. Initially, only certain ideas deemed extremely dangerous were censored. We need to stop hate speech, the censors declared. Subsequently, specific words were entirely prohibited. We cannot allow false information to spread, they patiently explained. Now AI algorithms automatically decide what you can and cannot view online, what opinions you can express, what questions you can ask, and most people accept all this without resistance. Why? Because they don't want to be labeled extremists, deniers, or conspiracy theorists. Bureaucracy. As social cancer, state bureaucracy has metastasized like a cancer, spreading through every aspect of private life. Today, you require official government permission for virtually any basic human activity. Building a house on your own land, opening a small business, homeschooling your children, hiring an employee, selling homemade goods, even felling a tree in your own yard. Taxes have become so exorbitant that most people literally work half the year just to pay the government. Between direct and indirect taxes, fees, mandatory contributions, and deliberately created inflation, over 50% of everything we produce goes directly into state coffers. We are more heavily taxed than medieval serfs, but we pay everything in silence, without complaint, without questioning. Why? Because we have been convinced that it is our sacred duty as citizens and that taxes are the unavoidable price of civilization. The diagnosis of decline. In 1978, a mysterious author identified only by the initials AS made an observation that proved prophetic. When collective courage wanes, this is the clearest sign that an entire civilization is entering irreversible decline. When people cease fighting for their own freedom, severe oppression not only becomes possible, it becomes inevitable. Hess was absolutely right. A society predominantly comprised of the faint-hearted will inevitably spawn individuals fixated on total control, much as stagnant swamps perpetually breed mosquitoes. This isn't because these controllers possess exceptional power, intellect, or charisma, but rather because they discover fertile psychological ground in millions who genuinely prefer being directed over shouldering the responsibility of charting their own lives. The silent psychological revolution. How precisely did we arrive at this historical juncture? The answer lies in the profound psychological shift our society has gradually undergone over the last 6 decades. We intentionally cultivated a culture entirely predicated on external social validation as the supreme absolute value. From a very young age, every child learns that group acceptance outweighs authenticity, truthfulness, or courage. Constant external approval has literally become our most potent addiction. Reflect honestly on your own childhood. Do you recall every instance where you did something truly creative, original, or distinct, only for a responsible adult to immediately say, "Stop drawing unnecessary attention, don't be strange, go play like the other normal children"? 12 entire years of formal schooling constituted 12 consecutive years of planned, intensive psychological conditioning designed to produce compliant corporate employees, not free citizens and independent critical thinkers. The addictive power of social media. Then digital social media emerged, vastly amplifying this pre-existing psychological issue. You now carry a 24-hour approval meter in the palm of your hand. How many likes? How many hearts? How many positive comments? Your brain automatically releases dopamine, serotonin, and other pleasure chemicals whenever it receives any form of online validation, establishing a truly addictive cerebral cycle that rivals hard drugs. Social media algorithms significantly worsen this already problematic situation. They were meticulously engineered to maximize your screen time and emotional engagement. How do they achieve this so efficiently? By exclusively displaying content that confirms your current beliefs and biases, and that elicits intense emotional reactions. You are literally ensnared in an artificially perfect reality bubble, completely isolated, where it seems absolutely everyone agrees with you on virtually everything. The confusion between legality and morality. The worst aspect isn't even this unhealthy reliance on external social approval. The gravest problem is that this psychological dynamic has fostered a terrible and extremely dangerous mental confusion between legality and morality. The vast majority of people today fervently believe, with almost religious conviction, that if something is legally permissible, then it is automatically morally correct. If something is legally prohibited, then it is automatically morally incorrect. We have entirely forgotten that governments also routinely enact deeply immoral and unjust laws. Forced servitude was entirely legal for centuries. The historical atrocities of extreme authoritarian regimes were completely legal within their countries. Racial segregation was perfectly legal. Systematic religious persecution was entirely legal in the Soviet Union. Some of history's greatest atrocities and injustices were committed within the strictest formal legality, with enormous popular approval and the enthusiastic support of millions and millions of law-abiding citizens. The mechanism of destruction. A psychologist named Dr. Robert Miller identified a terrible and predictable pattern he called the continuum of destruction. It always begins small and seemingly harmless, but gradually escalates to literally unimaginable atrocities. First step: specific minorities are subtly repressed and marginalized. Nothing too obvious at first. just some relatively minor and seemingly reasonable limitations. Most people remain silent because these limitations do not personally affect them. Second step, the intellectual, moral, and ideological justification for the escalating repression arrives. They truly deserve this special treatment. They are genuinely dangerous to societal security. Society begins to accept that some groups are fundamentally different, essentially inferior or naturally threatening. Third step, authoritarian measures systematically escalate to open, systematic, and mass persecution. But when we finally reach this terrible point, it is too late for any effective social resistance. The gradual dehumanization. A specific psychological mechanism explains how perfectly normal people can reach the point of supporting or even directly committing the worst historical atrocities imaginable. When one witnesses unjust suffering and does absolutely nothing concrete to try and stop it, the mind automatically enters a state of severe cognitive tension. To reduce this unbearable mental tension, the brain automatically begins to devalue, diminish, and gradually dehumanize the victims of the witnessed suffering. This gradual process of psychological dehumanization is extremely subtle and imperceptible at first. First, one simply stops seeing certain people as completely human. Then, one progressively stops feeling real empathy for them. Finally, one can easily accept or even actively support practically anything that happens to them. Systematic economic dependence. The modern financial system was carefully, intentionally, and deliberately structured to create maximum psychological dependence in the general populace. Practically unpayable university debts that last for decades, 30-year residential mortgages that enslave entire families, credit cards with abusive compound interest. I cannot afford to risk my current position. I have many bills to pay and an entire family to support. This artificial financial dependence is not accidental. Political and economic authorities know perfectly well that financially desperate people and dependent individuals are consistently politically controllable and malleable. Occasionally, like a ray of sunlight piercing through dark clouds, an extraordinary individual emerges who completely shatters this destructive social pattern. Robert Miller was a perfectly ordinary young man from the Western world who grew up during the height of the most systematically oppressive communist regime in human history. His own mother worked directly within the high echelons of the KGB. Yet, knowing full well the enormous risks involved, Robert made the conscious decision to found an underground resistance group called Free Russia. Robert was indeed captured by the KGB and spent 5 whole years in Siberian forced labor camps under the most brutal conditions imaginable. When he was finally released, a brave Western journalist managed to secretly find him and asked if he regretted his choices. His response was simple. "I did not remain silent when I should have spoken. I did exactly what I had to do as a human being, even knowing perfectly well that my individual contribution would be very small and likely useless." Why exactly was Robert such an extraordinary historical exception? Because real and authentic moral courage requires being psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually willing to literally sacrifice everything that the vast majority of people consider most important. Family, personal security, material comfort, social approval, prestige, career, sometimes even one's physical life. Moral courage means being willing to be publicly ridiculed, socially isolated, politically persecuted, economically impoverished, physically assaulted, even brutally silenced for your deepest moral principles and convictions. It means consciously choosing uncomfortable and dangerous truth over immediate social popularity, inconvenient and risky justice over guaranteed personal safety, painful and isolated authenticity over constant external approval. Nature surgically predicted 2 fundamental human types that would dominate humanity's future. The last man, a psychologically comfortable, secure, and content creature who systematically avoids all risk, challenge, conflict, or possibility of suffering. "We invented happiness," he says, blinking with small mediocre satisfaction. The Übermensch, that extraordinary individual who managed to completely overcome their primitive herd instincts. Who developed the capacity and courage to create their own independent moral values? Who dares to live dangerously, to grow constantly and continuously? If collective cowardice continues to dominate, the fate of Western civilization is mathematically sealed. Ayn Rand predicted what she technically called the ultimate inversion, a world of total and absolute control, where the government is absolutely free to do literally whatever it desires, and ordinary citizens can only act with explicit permission from the competent authorities. We already need bureaucratic government licenses to work in most professions, official permits to build practically anything, mandatory state certifications to teach, specific legal authorizations to sell products or services. The ultimate inversion will be inevitably and systematically sold to the popular masses as necessary protection, guaranteed security, and paternal care. And cowards will applaud enthusiastically because they truly prefer the security of guaranteed total control to dangerous and uncertain freedom. Cowardice is not just an isolated personal flaw, it is a conscious collective choice that we are making every day, millions of times through seemingly unimportant small decisions. Every time we comfortably and cowardly remain silent in the face of an obvious injustice, every time we passively and automatically accept a clearly absurd and oppressive rule. Become who you are, declared nature as a fundamental moral imperative. But only truly brave people can discover who they really are beneath all the social masks, external expectations, and psychological programming. The only real way out is a truly brave minority willing to pay the terrible price of moral resistance. The inevitable alternative is a world where brute force absolutely governs everything, and freedom becomes just a lifeless word in dusty history books. Do you have the moral courage to be an authentic individual? Or do you prefer to cowardly remain just another obedient animal in the herd? The choice is exclusively yours. Humanity stands at the edge of an abyss. The question that defines our era is, will you remain a coward or will you dare to be an individual? Resistance against collective cowardice always begins with small, individual acts of brutal intellectual honesty, and maybe, just maybe, you will discover that you are much braver than you ever imagined possible.